You are listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Welcome to C-Suite Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. I'm Steve Odland from the Conference Board and the host of this podcast series, and in today's discussion we're going to talk total rewards. No, we're not talking about a pirate's chest. We're talking about how organizations use benefits and perks and everything else, and what should CHROs and CEOs be thinking about. Joining me today is Rita Meyerson, the principal researcher in our Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. Rita, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you're not a pirate, but you are going to talk about treasure.
Yes.
Total
yes.
rewards is a term that's used by, human capital professionals, human resource professionals. But tell our listeners what it means.
So it's a comprehensive suite of motivational levers that employers, organizations use to attract and retain talent. So this includes what you talked about, compensation, so from base pay to overtime to short-term and long-term incentives, including equity, the benefits, well-being, which you and I spent lots of time talking about, recognition, both monetary and non-monetary, and career. So from tuition reimbursement to also the opportunities in kind of skill-first organizations that take that approach, where you have an opportunity to grow and develop your career.
Yeah, and benefits include a whole package of things, a variety of things as well.
Yes, so all of your health care, financial wellness also goes into that, your retirement components, pet care. This has evolved so much since when you became a CEO many years ago.
Hey, now come on, we weren't going to talk about age here. No, but look, it's a big deal, and it's really important to employees. It's
yes.
really important for attraction. It's
yep.
really important for retention. So these are important tools. Everybody focuses on base pay, but it's all this other stuff is really, key here. I think in our employee relationship.
Yes, and also time off, vacation, holidays, and now even workplace flexibility. So it encompasses many things here.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about it, it's a really important area. Is it why don't CEOs and CHROs spend more time on this?
It's such a good question when you think about spending more time. I think they're going to be spending more time because we've kind of alluded to this expanding. And when you come back to attraction and retention, our annual C-Suite Outlook survey from the Conference Board for the past, I believe it's 3 years in a row, CEOs and CHROs rated attraction and retention as their highest internal factor, something that they're focused on, beyond digital transformation and often revenue growth. So attraction and retention is so important. And this is the most important way of bringing employees in and retaining them.
Yeah.
It needs to be focused. And the rewards are levers to support your business strategy, so to enable and drive it, to evolve your culture, and to reinforce the behaviors that you want to see from leaders and employees.
Well, it's part and parcel to the culture. I mean, maybe not base pay. You could say, well, that's not, but it is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
are they a high pay or lower pay, or
right.
is it? Do you structure it with high low base, but then more incentive pay?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the so everything about the culture is reinforced and or tied to the total package, which
yes.
is why it's called total rewards.
Yes. Such a good point. And you talked about market pay. Like, do you want to pay at the 50th percentile? Do you want to pay at the 75th percentile? Are you below the 50th percentile? And then what combination of additional incentives are you going to include in terms of cash incentives, equity, retirement, et cetera?
Yeah, and in this period of time with historically low unemployment
yes.
and skills shortages, companies really do need to be mindful that they are providing the right balance here.
Yes, the balance is really important, but back to culture, each organization is going to be unique, and you need to think about what's going to best serve your employees. So if you are, for example, a large retailer, And we've done a number of roundtables on this work for the past, throughout 2024. And in order to encourage kind of this entrepreneurial mindset and ownership mindset of store managers, they looked at their compensation and said, okay, how do we integrate this an ownership component into this? And they looked at the market that they were in, the size of the store, and then the incentives for store managers and employees throughout were based on how the store performed.
Right, because they're trying to replicate an owner mentality, rather than a chain employee mentality, so that they do a better job of taking care of their customers and owning the metrics, But also this whole period of time through COVID, where we went from largely not perfectly 100% in the office, but mostly in the office, to 100% out of the office, at home and remote, has brought this whole concept of place from which you work as a dynamic and total rewards.
Yes.
And so you have this situation where flexibility.
Yep.
Is because they used to talk about flexibility in terms of job sharing or overtime or part-time, but flexibility today means where you work and when you work and how that fits into a team environment, yada yada yada. Talk a little bit about
that. Paradigm has shifted so much, and I think about that from the time I entered the workforce almost 3 decades ago to where we are today. It's just seismically different. And when I first arrived at the conference board, one of our rapid response surveys returned to us what workers' perceptions were, that after base pay, flexibility was the most important kind of reward after base pay. And that was really eye-opening to us, that that's something that organizations need to consider as part of their strategy.
And a lot of people said, okay, when we come out of the pandemic, we'll go back where we were. In fact, that's really not possible anymore, because we everybody's proven that work can be done remotely, and maybe 100% remote is not the ideal. And certainly you can't do services, you can't cut hair remotely, you can't build a building remotely. So we're talking about mostly professional in-office kinds of jobs. But that balance then becomes a bit of an expectation. And then we saw a period of time where employees had happy feet, and they went around and sought organizations that gave them the most flexibility.
Yes, and I think maybe we're kind of regressing back to the mean a bit on that, because we are seeing strong indication of the return to office in some industries. Some industries will say, even for office workers, so big tech, we're seeing a push. Certainly in financial services, it's an area that we're seeing a push in. And I think there's a rationalization kind of working out in terms of, with, maybe it's not a rationalization, but it's a conversation where there's tensions both from management and employees in terms of where is the best place to get work done, and how do we do it most efficiently. And it really puts the pressure on leaders of the organization to figure this out.
But this should be thought of in the context of a total rewards package as well. So it's about having a tool in your toolbox to motivate and so forth. But then the whole nature of work has to be examined, and what gets done when they're in the office, what gets done when they're out of the office, how you plan all that. So flexibility then, takes on a much bigger role, as you said, after base pay. Another thing that you found in your research was, and I'm not sure people believe this when they first saw the data, but recognition was one of the key things that was important to people in the context of engagement.
Yes. So recognition is a really interesting area to kind of take a look at from a rewards perspective. It's very important for engagement. Well, if we come back to culture, recognition is a key lever to reinforce, especially when you talk about celebrating successes in the short term. And we see with some of our members that they've kind of repositioned their entire short-term incentive program. So we're talking about a large global telecommunications company that took hundreds of millions of dollars in their short-term incentive and put it all into a recognition program that was easily accessible to managers and peer recognition. And it paid these kind of short-term rewards that were aligned to not only your contribution to the business, but how you got it done. So aligned to the cultural pillars. So really important, your behaviors. And you could get up to 5 to 10% of your salary, base pay, in these rewards.
Yeah, and that's
from a recognition perspective.
And that's one example of recognition that's tied to some level of compensation. There's another aspect to recognition, which can be thought of in total rewards, which is just people the non-monetary recognition. Say thank you, recognize service, recognize performance, call them out in a positive way in a public fashion, and celebrate and that's all soft, but critically important as part of how, if you think of the term reward is, what reward does somebody get from being part of this organization? Mm-hmm. That's a big intrinsic and psychological reward.
Yes. And it actually is so great you brought, because it brings up, it's two ways. The person giving the reward oftentimes has such a positive experience from that, and that also reinforces retention as well as the person getting recognized. So it works both ways, and you're reinforcing your values and the behaviors that you want your organization to embody.
And you find that manager-employee or supervisor-employee relationship is really, the core of how people think about engagement. And we know that engagement scores in a company are really important to retention, performance, interaction with customers, the whole experience. So, but it comes down to that, and just thinking about recognition as saying thank you for something.
Yep.
It doesn't cost anything.
No.
But yet, the upside is just incredible in terms of morale, and therefore it's it's like, if somebody, you walk in, so you mentioned a retail, if you walk in and you mistreat the people in the store, if you are hard and harsh on the people in the store, they turn around and they're hard and harsh to their customers, right? Because it flows all the way down through, and so you can just tell the organizations where people have really mean managers.
Oh, we could have a whole podcast just about that. But that's really interesting. And we talk so much about this when we talk about the topic of well-being and how important it is to engage with, as the manager, to engage with your employees, and the idea of how are you, and the thank you piece is really important, and makes the entire work environment much more positive. You're willing to exert extra effort, which is how we would define engagement. People have a more entrepreneurial spirit. They're more innovative. The psychological safety is higher. When you have that environment where you feel you're appreciated, you're respected, and you can also take risks.
And these are the soft sides of total rewards. But going back, so let's go back for those CFOs that are listening, the CEOs. I mean, you don't do this in a vacuum, right? I mean, you start with your business model, you start with what you're trying to accomplish, and then you try to put together some sort of package of rewards and, this whole construct in order to bring out the best in your people and ultimately make them more productive, make them more innovative, make them, more impactful with your customers. There is a means to this.
Yes, and at the end of the day, you're going to have a budget that you're working within, but the more autonomy your manager or your GM or your local supervisor, even in a store, might have, will enable that performance where you're talking about that. It's harder to, the more of the softer skills, but you're still able to deliver rewards, like your short-term or long-term incentives through that mechanism.
Yeah. We're talking about total rewards in the context of today's organization. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
What does the future of work mean for your employees? How will your company navigate ESG? Will there be a global recession? At the Conference Board, our experts translate the latest research and economic analysis into insights and real-time problem solving for your organization. Membership at the Conference Board provides your team with an assortment of knowledge, from economics, marketing and communications, ESG, public policy, and human capital. As a member, you'll have access to our center experts, member-exclusive events, data and benchmarking tools, and peer sharing that will help you understand the present and shape the future. Consider becoming a Conference Board member today by visiting www.conference-board.org.
Welcome back to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland from the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by Rita Meyerson, Principal Researcher in the Human Capital Center here at the Conference Board. Okay, total rewards. We talked about, what are all the things that should be thought of in that, which is kind of everything that is provided, quantitative and qualitative. And we made we just talked before the break about the importance of the qualitative stuff. But how does all of that impact and evolve culture?
Well, let's take a look. That's such a big question. Let's take a look, for example, as an organization has an acquisition that they're integrating or a new business strategy. So you might have new goals or a new organizational strategy, a new organizational structure, and you might then have values that are refreshed or the same values. And at the end of the day, how do you get your employees to achieve those goals, right? So how are you reinforcing that from a culture perspective? And if we think about the values, what are the behaviors that you want exhibited? Not necessarily what they are. You are clear on what they're delivering because those goals tie back to your business strategy, but how they're doing it is just as important often as what they're doing. And when you talk about culture, you think about the values, the behaviors that you want exhibited. You want to reinforce that in your performance management and how you reward people. So if you have your base salary.
But connect that with culture now.
Connect it with culture. So when you have your pay for performance philosophy in many organizations, even in a non-for-profit like ours, you want to look at what are the behaviors, the values that exemplify your culture. So, for example, innovation, integrity, collaboration, communication. You want to include that in your performance management, and you're going to recognize that in your annual compensation package.
Well, and vice versa. You start with your values and you say, let's build a series of rewards that fit the values. So you don't just say, here's if your value is innovation or your value is customer care, you tie the rewards to those aspects of your values that are critically important.
Yes.
There's also the multi-constituency world that business leaders live in today. So it's not, it used to be take care of the shareholder and the rest of it takes care of itself. But we're in a world now where customers, employees, owners, community, environment, all of these constituents are important. And so, the employees are one aspect of that. And it's not one or the other. It's not just, ones and zeros in and out. They all need to integrate. So you need to think about all of those constituents, and then how do the employees need to engage with those groups, and what do you need out of your employee base in order to take care of all those groups, and hence the total rewards are your means with which you motivate all of that.
Yes, and you reflect in the choices that you choose to include in your package. So whether that is, there's all the compensation pieces, but there's also your healthcare benefits, your retirement savings, volunteer days, giving back to your community. Other elements of the rewards, the well-being strategy, all of those elements are able to meet the needs of these diverse stakeholders. So you have a lot more flexibility, options, and personalization going on now than you had decades ago.
You mentioned community. That's kind of where I was going, because one of the constituents is the community around you, and providing a total rewards plan that allows people to have volunteer days, or giving back to the community in your donation strategy, or
in your philanthropy.
Linking all of that is so important. It motivates your people, but it motivates the community. It builds goodwill. All of that, and that's you don't that stuff's not taught in business school. I mean, this is where business and communities are one.
You're right. And we talked about this in our well-being podcast. When we think about employees really are coming to work and they have this like safe haven and community at work, and what are we giving back to the community in which they operate in? So it's an important relationship. I'm glad that you brought that up.
And workforces now are changing. Our the demographics of our society are changing. There are more women than ever before. Majority of college graduates are women. Majority of graduate school graduates are women. Majority of consumers are women. We are rapidly approaching a majority-minority society. It's a whole different conversation. But the point is, we're more diverse than ever before in the history of this country. And so rewards, recognition, are all part of the engagement between a company and employees, but it's a broader thing. It has to change because of this diversity.
And it's also the age diversity, because we have 4 generations of workforce. Some say 5. And the expectations and where you are, say, a generation, or where you are in life stage. So whether you are just entering the workforce, or you are maybe starting a family, or you're near retirement age, these rewards, having options and flexibility to what to do with your compensation, not only your base salary, but some of that deferred comp, is going to vary depending upon what life stage you're at. And that is a competitive edge that organizations need to be thinking about. So when you come back to your CFO, that's something they need to be thinking about, because it's expensive to offer flexibility.
Well, there you go again. You mentioned that you're using that word flexibility, but that is not just something that is good because people want, flexibility. It addresses, it allows you under a policy, a structured policy, to address a very diverse set of needs. So stop thinking about it. I think what you just told me very politely. Don't think about it in terms of gender. Think about it in terms of need states.
And I love that you brought up diversity, because it is complex, and diverse points of view and people coming from diverse personal situations, care situations. They could be caring for young children. They can be caring for adults. I even saw recently that FMLA is now covering clinical trials in cancer patients. That's very new.
Yeah. And there's a lot of statistics on pets that
yes.
They now, there's going to be 3 times as many pets as there are children, and basically they are children for a lot of households. I think something like 61% of households are single people. So all of this, so this becomes important to them, and so employers can say, well, what does that make it important for me? Well, because these are your people.
Yes.
And if it's important to them, so therefore, what can you do to help and make your workplace a more attractive workplace, and show that you care about your people?
I love that you brought up the pet example, because not only from a pet insurance perspective, but also flexibility. There was such a rise of pets during the pandemic, and now that we're back to pre-pandemic levels in many areas, people are still, they didn't just get rid of their pets.
No.
So
those are their babies.
Right. Yeah. So that's a whole nother level of care in addition to
but it goes to the whole total. It's just an example of how do you think about total rewards. You have to think about the people. You have to think about the needs, the diverse needs of people, the diverse and the flexibility within your programs to address those diverse needs, the changing lifestyles, the changing household situations. It feels like we're talking about 100 different things, but we're really not. We're talking about people and how their lives have changed. And it's not like, you can just put up a wall and say, well, that's home life and this is work life, because it's all merging.
Yeah, exactly. And when we have these human capital conversations, whether it's hybrid, whether it's well-being, or it's total rewards, or it's anything around attraction and retention, you're exactly right. The merging of lives, it's all one, versus like the home life was separate and the work life was separate, and it's merged.
Yeah, and employers may not like that, but that's the real world. I mean,
Yep.
you have to deal with it, and especially when you're thinking about a hybrid world as well. The home is the workplace, and the workplace is kind of the home. In certain people's minds and generations. We saw this for instance in the pandemic, when people had to stay home, and you had single person households in these tiny apartments. They were climbing on the walls. They needed to get back to the office for socialization purposes, and so mental health was impacted.
Right.
It goes on and on and on.
Right. I'm laughing. I'm one of those people in the small New York City apartments.
Yeah. So, but it's all over the country, and so these are the kinds of things that I think companies really need to think through. So, what role does when you're thinking about leadership, and a lot of our listeners are managers, of people, certainly, but not just CHROs and CEOs, but how should managers writ large think about their total rewards strategy and make sure that it's effectively implemented?
Well, we know that leaders are the linchpin here. We used to say that was middle managers, but it's all people leaders, because organizations have become much flatter, and your direct manager is very important. And that is the person that is making compensation decisions, and they're also a culture carrier. So if they are given the budget, if you're as a leader, I'm given a budget to during annual compensation, whether that includes a merit increase, a cost of living increase, also short-term and long-term incentives, I have the opportunity to divvy out that money based on the performance of my team. So organizations need to be incredibly focused on the people leader and making sure they're equipped to handle those conversations. That means a lot more communication and training specific around comp planning.
But this goes back to the nexus of the engagement score and the supervisor-supervisee relationship. So it's so much is driven by that relationship, which can be a frontline supervisor and who doesn't get the kind of training necessarily that somebody at a more senior level may get. And the point here is you need to be thinking about every level of supervision interaction, all the way up and down the workforce.
Yes, I like to kind of think of it leadership at all levels.
Yeah.
And you need that. The success of your compensation strategy, your total reward strategy, is dependent on your people leaders.
Yeah, and total rewards are typically thought of as monetary, as we've discussed. It's salary, it's base, it's just benefits, it's all of that, which does tend to, just because of the enormity of it and the cost, it gets managed and executed relatively centrally. But there are all of these examples which you've brought up and we've talked about that are the soft things that don't necessarily need the CHRO to approve you to do in your little team, right?
Yep.
You can do little recognition rewards. You can do thank yous at the end of every meeting. It's the rituals, the little rituals.
Yes, so important to culture.
It's so important to culture, and that doesn't cost you anything to implement, but it's a requirement that leaders train all the way down and give them not only the permission but encouragement to use these techniques.
The agency to do that. And that does a lot in terms of encouraging employee engagement. So it's a little bit easier when we talked about the example in the store manager. The numbers are a little harder. It's a little easier to make decisions around that. But when you're in a knowledge worker and you're leading a team, yes, the smaller things. A biotech company that we worked with has a lifestyle spending account that they give out to all employees. And within that, they give them opportunity to do volunteer, to do education days, to take flexible time up, etc. And really, it's up to the manager to make the decision on, does this make sense within the workflow of what we need to get done, not the CHRO.
Yeah, very interesting. Dr. Rita Meyerson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I hope to come back soon.
All right. And thanks to all of you for listening in to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm Steve Odland, and this series has been brought to you by the Conference Board.
You have been listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.